Hi, this is Trey Parker.
And this is Matt Stone.
And you're listening to the Pantheon Network.
Hey, I'm Nick DeMatteo, and welcome to Season 6, Episode 35 of Music is Not a Genre, MxG. I'm going to teach everybody those hand gestures next season, by the way. Oh, spoiler alert. There's a next season. Thank you, as always, for watching and listening. Those of you who are just listening, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. You get a video for every episode of this podcast. And the watchers can go to nickdematteo.com/musicisnotagenre. To find out where you can stream just the audio if you prefer to not look at my face. And of course, supporting Season 7, I'm interested in doing a bunch of upgrades, and you can help with that. Patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. Join there for free and then upgrade there when you can. And the fundraiser, I always put the fundraiser link, and I will keep that up until we raise the funds we need. Let's get right to this. This is the penultimate episode of Season 6. I like using that word, and it's also accurate. There's only one more episode next week, which is all about you. But this week is about this topic. Can bad people make good things? This is the 32nd installment of a sub-series called Music is Everything, and I explain it because I don't do that many of these. I used to do them more frequently in the first few seasons, and now I do maybe 2, 3, 4 a season. And what it is my opinions on an issue related to music that also relates to other things in the world. I think that's the shortest way to explain that. So this is Music is Everything, number 32. Can bad people make good things? So, first of all, of course they can. That's not the real question. I like the title. That's why I chose it. The real question is, can we still appreciate and consume the work that these people do? So why this topic? It's a topic that's been around for a very long time. It has been more heated in the last few years, especially. And I'm constantly asking this of myself, because there have been some pretty high-profile artists and other people in business, etc., who have been shown to maybe not be the greatest people on many levels, and yet they did work that I at least at one point loved and maybe still do love. I did an episode a couple of years ago on Michael Jackson and kind of framed the episode within this question. But I did address a bunch of these issues, but I don't feel like I really hit the nail on the head and really kind of dived in and fleshed it out in a way that showed more nuance, more boldness maybe, and more of my own take on it. So that's why I'm doing this, especially because we all need to answer this as individuals and as a society in a culture that right now, and probably has for hundreds of years, struggles on a global scale to understand nuance, gradation, and often, and I'm only going to use this word once because I can't stand it, because I think it's reductive, but it often, quote unquote, cancels people who feel don't measure up in some way. And we're going to get a little bit more into that. So that's some of the reasons why I'm doing this topic. It's a good topic for the penultimate, I used it again, episode of a season that has had its fair bit of controversy, at least as far as some of my own takes on some of the music that I have talked about, among other things. But I have to thank you, all of you, for the comments that you threw out, especially on YouTube, but everywhere really, telling me your opinion of certain things, a King's X album that I like that you didn't, same with Duran Duran, a bunch of other things like that, a lot of other think pieces as well. So I appreciate that, and you'll get to see how much I appreciate it next week when we do the live fan comments episode as the finale here. This talk will go well beyond music and art, at least for a bit, because it's something that is relevant across all facets of society. It's not going to be the be-all, end-all. In fact, I would love to do an episode next season of Back Talk with Steve Erickson or whoever is game for this, talking about this and kind of batting it around a little bit more, maybe using other sources and other examples of people, because I've chosen some pretty salient examples, but there are only a handful of hundreds, thousands, whatever that may be. The sources are really Wikipedia as usual, and that's pretty much it for that. And a note on the bonus MXtra video. So as you may know, especially if you're a patreon.com/musicisnotagenre subscriber, I do a bonus episode for every main episode of this podcast. And there will be some news starting in season 7 about other features that are coming very soon that will be helpful to you and to me. But for this one, I am going to do one, but it will be delayed. It will not be out as I do the week before this episode airs, because I'm waiting for your comments. I want to hear from you. I'm hoping that I incite a lot of emotion and a lot of thinking about this topic, and we'll devote this bonus MXtra video to reading and responding to your comments about this topic. So let's get some introductory points. Shocker, spoiler alert, imperfect people have been around for a really long time. No one who has lived hasn't messed up at some point. I am not necessarily a religious person, but I did grow up in a household like that, and I always remember from the Bible, they who are without sin, let them cast the first stone, and then nobody threw a stone because they were smart enough and perceptive, self-realization that no one's perfect. It's interesting to me that in this society, and I'm not going to get into the psychology, that's a whole different thing, hyper-moral and hyper-religious people, and by that I mean you can be moral without being religious, but in both cases, they're often the first ones to cast stones, to shun people, to talk about, how people shouldn't be respected anymore, et cetera, et cetera. They're often the first, in fact, to go against the teachings of their own religion, whatever religion that may be. There are messages of peace and love and acceptance and forgiveness in Islam, in Christianity, in Judaism, and all of them. That really is, in some ways, the essence of every religion, and that's always the body of thought that gets overlooked the most when you're dealing with these hyper-religious, hyper-moral people who still somehow claim to be more pious and more religious, even though they're going against their own teachings. But again, even if you're not religious, you can fall into the moralistic trap of believing that you exist above people who make mistakes, in particular public mistakes, because everyone makes private mistakes, and it is the rare person who hasn't made some kind of a public mistake, especially people who are in the public eye all the time. This is kind of a secular religious approach to condemnation, and I think is in some ways the most common, because a lot of people who, trolls and people who like to, what's the old word, flame others online, are not necessarily calling up their religion. It happens sometimes, but it's more calling up this sense of righteousness as to, oh, I found you out, I can take you down, and it gives them a sense of power. And that is something that I have talked about in other episodes. Forgiveness and rehabilitation should always be options, always. And by that I mean always. I'm not someone who believes in the death penalty. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that someone's actions should be excused or should be seen as, oh, okay, you get a pass, and that's not what it is. But I think the growth of the world, healing of the world, comes from the healing of individuals. And that comes from always leaving the option open for people to be forgiven, to seek rehabilitation, to seek forgiveness. And to seek rehabilitation, meaning bettering themselves, learning from their mistakes, learning from life just from trial and error. And that's one reason why right now our country and other countries are in such a terrible state. In particular, in this country, the prison system, for the most part, is not about that. It's punitive. I mean, that's part of the idea of going to prison, but there should be, most of those people, the vast majority, are going to be out in society. Again, there should be something within that system that helps them, be prepared for that on every level. The education system is in a shambles, and that has a lot to do with the fact that we treat educations like prisons now, and our inability to have a real conversation, which is not true. We all have the ability to have a real conversation, and we've done it. We've done it online even. Online, it's not a total cesspool. It's the same mix of things as pre-internet. And so we should take advantage of the fact that we can have these real conversations. I've done it. I have vehemently disagreed with people. Questlove posted something about Kamala Harris, and I, made a point about, I forget exactly what it was, but the point was that there's a difference between ideology and practicality, that we should have the high ideals and always strive for them, but be willing to take direct action that may not fully reach those ideals, because the only thing worse is no action at all, is holding out and kind of crossing your arms and saying, well, if you're not reaching the pinnacle of this ideology, I'm not going to do anything. I got some agreement. I got a lot of disagreement. And within the disagreement, there was agreement. And I found a way to talk about it with these people that it didn't become this shouting match. And I think that's something that we need to continue to cultivate. So meaning nuance and gradation is understanding that there is a spectrum of bad behavior. There's a difference between an offensive comment or opinion, sometimes done in jest or in a misguided way, or using those opinions, those offensive opinions, to advocate for others to do the same, or taking action yourself on those opinions that you hold. That's just small examples of how there is a spectrum of, what we could call bad behavior. We've all done at least one of those things, and some of us have done all three. It's again, a part of being human. Here's an example. Let's say you're a misogynist, and I mean you. No, here are the grades that I, am doing my best to illustrate. 1, you never speak of it. You do your best not to let it affect your thoughts and actions, but to some degree it does anyway. And I think a lot of us fall into this category, whether it's about race or gender or whatever it is, where we're trying really hard not to act on our inborn prejudices or however we acquired them, but we do in some ways anyway. And for some people, it might be 0.1% of their action, and they're, the ones who are struggling the hardest and doing the best. But for others, it might be 2, 5, 10, 20%, who knows? Number 2, you make your views on this misogyny known, but you say, that's just my opinion. I understand people might have different opinions. I may not agree with that view, but I think it's okay that you express it, first of all. And it's especially okay that you understand that other people may have differing views. So you're not preaching about it. Or you talk about it in hopes of convincing others to agree and believe, which was, really a step that's where I check out. Where if you are, and again, this is an example of misogynist, and you are using that belief as a way to convince other people that they should not just believe the same thing, but act on it, you've gone too far. And then even further, you actively make these comments toward women and are maybe verbally abusive or verbally harassing and all these things. It stays on a verbal level, but it's disturbing and it's wrong. Or you actively make physical intrusions. You might, I mean, I don't need to illustrate what happens when a misogynist makes physical intrusions towards women. You understand that that's another step, or you're abusive and beyond that, you're violent, you're, a rapist, a murderer, whatever. You can see how these are all stemming from misogyny, but man, there's a huge difference. And there were people that were thrown out of, public society, let's say, during Me Too, who should be in jail, who deserved it. Boom. I mean, all of that 100%, or who should be at least somehow, I don't know, there should be some consequence because they did anyone from, I would say 3 to 6 of the list that I just gave, starting from you're talking to others in hopes of convincing them all the way up to, violent and abusive. But there were others who were in the 1 or 2 category, which was you don't speak of it, you do your best, but sometimes it affects your actions or your words, or you do speak of it, but you tell people that's my opinion, I understand. I am not a person who believes that those people should be thrown out, even though I certainly disagree with the second group and will somewhat, and I try to be understanding with the first group because I've been there, on at least several topics, I guess you could say. And so that's where the nuance and gradation comes in. I think it was, somewhat of an error in judgment that some otherwise wonderful people got lumped in with people who were serial abusers, et cetera, et cetera. Those people deserve a chance to show that they understand that they made a misstep or crossed the line, and maybe even help to further the conversation as to how or why that was wrong and what we can do to think about this in a better way in general. And I would say this, think locally. We all know people, relatives, coworkers, friends, with whom we disagree, and worse, maybe don't even get along with, or don't like or respect at all. How do you handle those people? Do you categorically, if you disagree with them, you never talk to them again? Do you shun them? Do you reject them 100%? I mean, depending on how bad their beliefs or behavior is, of course. But if it's just somebody who has, let's say, a different political view than you, do you just not talk to them? Are you not friends with them? Or are you somebody who's like, oh, I can be friends, some of my relatives and at least colleagues do not at all hold some of the same political views that I do, but I'm not going to shun them. And that's a question I think we all have to answer. And that I think when we start locally, it can shed light on the judgments we are making about people we don't know, that we only know through the public eye. Are there times where you call out those people, you make it known that what they did or said is not kosher? Again, I think it depends on how bad I think a nudge about somebody who's constantly saying this is wrong, that is wrong, is not you would think that would be the way to go, but this is exactly like people online who are hyper moralistic, where it's like that's not helping anything. There's a different way to do it, and that is different way is talking to them, is expressing our opposing views, letting them know we understand where their views are coming from, but that we believe something different, and here's why. And it may not change anything, but I think it does plant seeds as far as I'm concerned, because I think conversations can change things and can heal. Do we respectfully disagree and consider the rest of their life? That's the thing that I like to do with people I love and generally respect, where they say something where I'm like, oh man, that's way off what I believe, and it disturbs me. But then I look at maybe they're a loving parent or spouse, or do wonderful things at work. Who knows? And we're going to get into a little bit of that in the second half when I talk about examples of various people. Which I'm saying this: does the context of their lives justify continued respect and association despite the disagreement or certain aspects of bad behavior, depending on the degree? can we continue to work with them and respect other things they do, right? And this leads to me to how we approach our consumption of art and other products made by non-artists, thinkers and business people and all of that. So let's get to some examples, historically and otherwise. Some are more contemporary, and these examples will again include artists and non-artists. And I'm going to do a few, and then we'll take a break just to kind of get the ball rolling on this. It's not going to be a definitive list. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's just some examples that came to my mind that I think are salient, but there are plenty of other artists who have been thrown under the bus or, rightfully condemned, who I'm not going to mention. This list includes way more men than women. That is something that we need to accept. We probably already know this, but it's not to say there aren't some heinous women out there, and a lot of those, and my wife will say this, are women who sidle up to someone in a position of power and hurt others as peers or below them in order to gain some of that power. In fact, I believe that a lot of, let's say, the political culture on the right side of the aisle comes from feeling like if you align with the rich people, you yourself will reap some benefit, which is pretty much never true. But keep dreaming. That's what I say. But that said, the majority of these people are men. It will include, again, many non-music people and non-artists in general to broaden the conversation and show that this is part of society all across the board. It just is. So let's start with a fairly, I think, easy one, which is R. Kelly. So I'll say off the bat, I've never been a huge fan of R. Kelly, not before or after there were any accusations or convictions. That just some of his music is things I've enjoyed, but there was a way that he approached music and his persona that I was just not a fan of, which I think kind of goes towards a point I'm going to make later, which has to do with the fact that some people's art is more revealing than maybe they realize it is about their inner life. And I mean, I think most art is, but that can turn into something pretty sour. So R. Kelly, repeated allegations of sexual abuse from 1991 to 2018, including child pornography. He received a 31-year combined sentence, which he's serving now. Seems like an open and shut case to me. I mean, the guy was abusive on so many levels and disturbed and all of that, and using, like you could say, using his power, and I think that is the case for pretty much all of these people, but it also comes from, I guarantee you, if this person had not been as successful and just had a high profile job and just making regular money, whatever, they would have found a way to do the same thing. So this is the reason we're doing famous people, is because we talk about them. They're examples we tend to know. Now, the fact that it's an open and shut case in terms of, is this someone whose work we should not appreciate because of his heinous acts? There you go, Freudian slip. Is not necessarily the case. And this is where it gets complex, because there is a song, of course, that he did. I believe it's his most famous, maybe his most successful, called I Believe I Can Fly. 1996, it was on the soundtrack to Space Jam, the first and better Space Jam. The thing about that is, it is still an incredible song. It is a song that has, that singers have embraced across the board all for years, before and after things about R. Kelly came out. And it is one that has inspired people. It has uplifted people. It's a song that I enjoy, that I still respect. And then there's just one more example. Michael Jackson, who we'll revisit later, his song "You Are Not Alone," which was his last #1 single in 1995, was written by R. Kelly. So this is somebody who has songwriting chops, who had performance chops. And while I do not consume the rest of his work, these are two songs that I enjoy in particular. I Believe I Can Fly. And I would understand if there are people out there who still listen to R. Kelly's music. And I'm going to get to that in the conclusion as to how can it be that we believe and know that a person has done some terrible things, but still find a way to separate the work that they've done and appreciate that. I think that that's kind of one of the main points of this episode. And so my conclusion on R. Kelly is, for me personally, I would not turn off I Believe I Can Fly if I heard it, especially if someone else was covering it or singing it. But everything else, it's just not my thing. And that's probably more a matter of artistic taste, but it's also a matter of, I think, the vibe that he emitted throughout his career, in the closet and all that stuff. I mean, brilliant, but man, very telling. And I think that's a good place to take a break for this half. It's only going to get more interesting, so stick around. Check out the mid-roll as usual. Please patronize me and the podcast at Patreon and all of that. And I will talk to you in a couple of minutes. Hey, so I was going to do the usual and just list all of the links that I'd love for you to check out, but I realized that everything you need to know and everywhere you need to go is at nickdematteo.com. That really is the hub. I list all the links in every episode just in case, but nickdematteo.com is where I put everything that I do. If you want to know more about this podcast, whether it's the audio version or the YouTube version at youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre or wherever else the podcast shows up, or if you want to support the podcast at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre, just go to nickdematteo.com. It's all there. If you want to check out my full discography of original music and covers for my band REC, and beyond, it's at nickdematteo.com, including all the streaming and social links for wherever you listen to music and wherever you check out your soch. My acting clips are there. My voiceover clips are there. Graphic design, my blog, and most especially, it's the best place to contact me. If you go to nickdematteo.com/contact, or just hit the contact is on every single page. You can send me a note, say hello, ask me any questions you'd like. You get a newsletter a few times a month. And if you have a project of your own and need work done for it, whether it's audio editing or music or voiceover or graphic design, or if you have an event and you need live music, go to nickdematteo.com, contact me, say hello, let me know what you need. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show. Okay, we are back, you disgusting perverts. Thank you for hanging with me for this pretty difficult topic, and I'm hoping that, again, it's rousing some response from you, because I would love to hear from you on the topic in general or on just one of these artists or people who I'm talking about. So we did R. Kelly, and we're going to go straight into P. Diddy. Again, there are songs of his that I've certainly enjoyed, at least in the 90s, when he was Puff Daddy, whatever, Sean Puffy Combs. But not overall, not a fan, because I feel as though his music is in general derivative. Now, yes, all music is derivative, but I think in his case, there was a bit of an opportunism that came from the way he produced music, and certainly the way that he's conducted business. A long list of infractions dating back to the 90s, mostly about money, business. Apparently not great at that, and not up on the up and up, but also very often related to violence, some quite heinous, and then, which all of that we knew, and then recently, bunch of accusations of rape, sex trafficking, and physical abuse. Another power-mad guy. And assuming any of that is true, and I have a strong belief that probably most, if not all of it is inexcusable on every level. There is no pass that I would give for somebody who acts like that. I mean, of course, anything that had to do with the rape and sex abuse and trafficking and all of that stuff, I can't imagine any sane person who would say any of that is okay. But there are people who believe that being ruthless in business is okay. I'm not one of those people, and I never will be. I think there is a way to conduct business in a successful and profitable way while still treating you and your employees and the people you work with outside of the company with respect. And that's apparently not something that he did very much. Yet. He also helped a lot of artists get their start in music, and a lot of those artists went on to a lot of success. So he's somebody who loves music and loved finding artists to work with who he can cultivate, and I won't say nurture because I don't think that's a word that should be used with him, but at least develop, let's say. And again, many of his hits, especially from the 90s, like I'll Be Missing You, they're beloved. I would be okay, same with R. Kelly, if he never made music again. I'd be fine with that. I do still have some respect for some of the work he did, both of them, but they aren't people that I feel I or the world will miss a ton, based partly on I really don't think, other than maybe I Believe I Can Fly, that any of the work they did would be called legendary or iconic or something that would stand the test of time through the ages, like 100 years from now. But also that's just my opinion, and I know there are people out there who still devour the work that these people do. That goes to the next artist, Marilyn Manson. I remember thinking when Marilyn Manson came out that he was spending more time and effort finding ways to be shocking in and out of music, as opposed to really cultivating the art and developing his own music. Now, you may disagree, partly because that's the kind of music you like. And the thing is, I like music like this. I like music that's even harder than this. If you can, I know Nine Inch Nails isn't the same, or you can talk about certain metal bands or industrial bands. That's stuff that I've listened to and have enjoyed on a certain level. I always felt like this was a dude who was trying really hard to be shocking in a way that kind of made it, I think, bland. But again, that is a personal opinion about his art. And I am not remotely fazed. There may be people out there who are so on the other side who are talking or thinking like the controversy, so-called, of his shock rock music and the things that he would sing about or the visuals that he would present in videos or on stage. And I am not a person who gives any credence to the idea that music or any art, video games, is actually directly responsible for violence or even inciting violence. And this is why. And I just edited a podcast for another client where the expert was very much on the side of violent games make children violent. And nope, or adults or whatever you want to say. No. And here's why. Check the numbers. 99.9999999% of people who listen to this music, who play those games, are not violent people. In fact, it can be cathartic to enact those things or feel those things within the realm of art, within a safe realm of art, as opposed to doing them. It is a minuscule percentage of people who buy into what these games and songs are saying or doing, that then say, well, now I have to go out and do this myself. It's minor. And here's the other part of that argument, which is if those games didn't exist and if that music didn't exist, they would find a way to do it anyway. But they would find their inspiration from something else. So that's not what this is about. What this is about was that Marilyn Manson was abusive. He assaulted women, including Evan Rachel Wood was the famous one, but many other women. Again, you're seeing a pattern. So the first three people I talked about, it's one of the reasons why I chose misogyny as a topic, of an example, of the spectrum of things. And these are all guys who have gone far beyond any acceptable point on that spectrum. You could say that, like R. Kelly, but in a different way, his music has a flavor of his personal failings. Now, if someone who didn't know Trent Reznor listened to Nine Inch Nails and there were certain songs, you could say, oh my God, this guy's disturbed, whatever it is. But anybody who knows him, anybody who has followed him knows that this is a form of expression. So I will never say that just because somebody sings about something violent or anything in a song, that means that that's what they do in life. But there are times where it is psychologically revealing, and maybe more so than they want it to be, and maybe giving them sort of, if they believe, oh my God, in deep inside their song is loved, then that means, oh, it's okay for me to do these things and I'll still be loved, which is, again, that's a real twisted way to think in, therapy. But that is, I believe, a part in a way of how some people like this operate. Now, again, I'm not sure anything he did is going to stand the test of time or is worth consuming. And the fact that in the case, I believe, of these first three people I've talked about, none of them have issued any apologies or efforts at saying they want to be forgiven or want to rehabilitate, that in fact it's been denial, means that wherever they are, in or out of prison and all of that, at this point, it seems like it will only get worse. Does it mean that won't change at some point? I mean, there are people who have, rehabilitated late in life. Yeah, it might, but I just don't see it with any of these. And that, is infuriating, basically. Which brings me to a slightly different take. A guy named Ryan Adams, if you don't know him, he was kind of an indie country, alt country artist, 90s, 2000s, and beyond. I've been a casual fan, but only because of his album Rock and Roll from 2003, which I absolutely loved. I like his sound, I like his voice, but I don't know much else about the rest of his music because I'm not somebody who dives deep into country in general, and I just should say that up front. What's he done? 7 women, including Phoebe Bridgers and Mandy Moore, accused him of harassment, of offering to help them with their careers and then pursuing them romantically, I think almost as a quid pro quo thing, then retaliating when they rebuffed him with hindrances to their career and harassments. And here's the difference. Again, not acceptable behavior. Nothing about it. Not a penny of it is acceptable, right? I could have expanded that metaphor or whatever. R. Kelly, P. Diddy, Marilyn Manson, unapologetic, denying, continuing the behavior, right? Ryan Adams admitted to all of it in 2020 and apologized. Now, does that wipe out what he did? Should those women now just say, let bygones be bygones and we can be friends? No, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is there is at least a hope that since 2020, he is doing his best to rehabilitate himself and to find better ways to act in the world. And these are the kind of illustrations we need. We need to see people who have done things that suck and more, and then show that they understand that they did those things and that they were wrong, and that they are admitting to them and apologizing and doing their best to find better ways to be. Because I believe that most people on earth have the ability to do that, especially if they're given the chance and given support. And at the same time, the people who they perpetrated these things on should be given even more support and respect and, and love and care. So it's not, again, it's not to excuse any of this. I do think he's trying to redeem himself, and I'm not the cynical person who says he's just doing it for his career, which I'm sure some people have done. It's one of those like politicians who apologize so that they can get back on the track, whatever. You can see through that. It's threadbare. I don't think that's the case here. I don't know. Which brings me to a similar case. Dr. Luke, who is a producer and songwriter, he's in the news now because Katy Perry put together a comeback single and chose Dr. Luke to work with, to produce it and maybe co-write it. I don't know. It sounds like kind of she wrote it. And everyone's panning the single as not understanding the point of view. Is it sincere? Is it ironic? Whatever. But they're even more questioning, why did she choose to work with Dr. Luke of all people? Now, some could say, well, she had success with Dr. Luke in the past, as did other artists he worked with like Kesha, Doja Cat, Becky G, Kim Petras, Pink, Avril Lavigne, Kelly Clarkson, and dozens of others that he's worked with. But Katy Perry's had success with other producers, so I don't like it. Just seems like either she was unaware of the accusations against him or believed they're not true or didn't care. It just sends a weird message. Now, Dr. Luke has made some great and memorable singles, ones that I have absolutely enjoyed. But in 2014, Kesha accused him of emotional distress, which is not a crime, but it's fucked up, sex-based hate crimes, and employment discrimination, which both of those are just disgusting to me. But this is the hard part. He's a songwriter's producer. Great. His stuff, him, whatever. I don't care if he comes or goes, frankly. There are other producers similar to him. Fine. You know, I don't know if I believe he has denied all of this and has fought it. So I don't think there's necessarily a sense of rehabilitation here. Although it's been 10 years and maybe Katy Perry knows something we don't. I don't know. But either way, you cannot fault the artists he worked with. You know, they're famous or not, these are people who want their music out, who want to be beloved, especially people who worked with him who didn't, know he was doing that or suffered that abuse under him and still loved the music that they were doing enough that they wanted to put it out and hope that other people loved it. So I think that those artists should still obviously be respected, but that music that they did with him is still worth listening to. Even if his stuff, right? I mean, in his behavior, no. Which goes, okay, Michael Jackson. This is going to be a little weird because I did an episode, again, like I said, about him. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe if I revisited that episode, I'd find that my views were pretty clearly expressed there. I don't know because it's been a couple years, maybe 3 years at least. But I felt when I finished that I was not definitive enough, let's say, because I danced around things. Here we go. Child sexual abuse allegations, many more than one. And I don't know if any of them were proven. They were settled out of court. I'm not sure what of that is true or not true. I'm not going to say categorically that it's not true, nor will I say it's true. And either way, I'm not giving him a pass for that behavior. But a couple things. First of all, there is absolutely no way on earth that his work can be shelved. His music has been too influential. It's brought so much joy to so many people across the world. It's ubiquitous. It will never go away. This is an example, unlike the others, where this will stand the test of time. And has already done so and will continue to. So this is a case where when we get to some historical figures where I believe that the work far, far, far outshines any personal issues. Again, not excusing them. And the second thing is he did a lot of work when he was a kid that is revered. And how do you reconcile, okay, well, maybe stuff he did after the mid-'80s when he was really getting into some weird behavior, you might feel a little hinky about. But prior to that, what, like a kid, a young adult, when I believe, and I could be wrong, he was pretty much on the up and up and dealing with his own psychological and personal issues. Do you shun that? Do you shun ABC because of what he did after? It's a hard question. This is why this episode is so fun for me and so I think important. And yeah, far more good than harm. I think there is, and I'm not going to say this as an excuse, but there's race involved in this. There's, I mean, you could say there was race involved. I mean, people say there was race involved in OJ. And even though I think it's pretty clear that he did what he was accused of doing, and maybe not, although not convicted, I do think that said, there are plenty of African American and minority artists who are never accused of any damn thing, right? So it's not just about race. But I will say that quite often race does play a part, and I would imagine and I would bet you that there are a lot of white people who far and away get away with their behavior without ever being called out for it or hush it up or have people on their side enough that they aren't thrown to the wolves like this. But again, I didn't know him, who did, and I'm not passing judgment on him as a person. I'm just saying his work will always be legendary. Which brings me to another legendary body of work that has somehow been handled differently and in a way you can understand. And I think there's one reason, maybe two. Bill Cosby. Absolute stand-up genius, revolutionary. He was a great writer and producer. He had hit TV shows from the 1960s through the 2000s. He's been influential to so many people. People have cited him as an influence even today, even though they know it's a tough thing to bring up. He broke color barriers. In 1965's I Spy, which was a TV show I loved to watch in reruns when I was a kid, was the first TV drama to feature a starring African American, paired with Robert Culp. So it's that, black and white dynamic. He did amazing child programming in the 1970s, which I watched and loved. He contributed to Electric Company. He created Fat Albert and the Brown Hornet and all that stuff that was on there, and this music. Oh my God, I absolutely loved it. He co-produced some great comedy films in the 70s, Uptown Saturday Night, and kind of offsetting what they thought of as the blaxploitation films. Let's do comedies instead of the action films. And of course, The Cosby Show in the 80s, followed by A Different World. He did Little Bill in the late 90s and 2000s, which was an amazing kids show. And my first kid watched some of that and did some more great kids fare. Hard to dispute all of that stuff. But, and a big but, tons of sexual assault allegations, including rape, date rape, the drugging, and all of that. And they date back as far as 1965. So from the time he had some type of industry power, he'd been doing this. Doesn't mean he didn't do it before, but we know at least since 65. A huge pattern. That never stopped. I loved so much of what he did, but I still have a hard time going back to it. I haven't watched reruns of, Cosby Show or Fat Albert. I haven't, consumed any of his stand-up or anything like that. So somehow, different from Michael Jackson, his work has somewhat disappeared. And I think it's, partly because it's not music, and music is more, it infiltrates more. You can ignore things that you have to watch and dial up, as opposed to you're in a pharmacy and you hear a Michael Jackson song. And B, he's still alive. And I think this is a huge point about people who we know historically who did not do great things in some parts of their life, but who did amazingly great things in other parts, that once they're dead, we are better able to absorb the good stuff they did and dismiss, or at least not dismiss, but at least put the bad stuff in a different box. Which brings me to another living person, Woody Allen. Iconic, influential movies, incredible writer. Apparently, for most people, very good to work with, is what I've heard. Has a good directing style and all of that. Lets the actors do what they want to do. But accused of sexual molestation of adoptive daughter, and he married another adoptive daughter, Soon Yi. They are still married, by the way, which I think is telling in some way, but who knows. All of this is disturbing. Accusations are disturbing. None of them were ever proven, but you cannot, dismiss the accusers because something happened there, and we don't know what it is. This guy is clearly troubled. He has admitted to being troubled, but has not admitted to being troubled in this way. So this is complex. The facts are complicated. The facts are compromised on both sides, and it's hard to say what's true and what isn't. Although Ronan Farrow is pretty strong in saying that the guy is in large part reprehensible. I don't know. I know nobody knows. Nobody may ever know, frankly. And it would be nice to hear more from him and still, of course, the accusers who have talked much more. But it would be difficult to dismiss his entire body of work. And many artists who both have and haven't worked with him still respect the work that he's done. And so, would I like to hear more about the truth of what went on there directly from him? Sure. But at the same time, I loved so many of his movies. So many actors who worked with him loved working with him. I think there are some who would still work with him. It's super, super freaking complicated, as this topic is. Stanley Kubrick, or Kubrick, whatever, falls under the heading of apparently a supreme asshole at work very often, terrible handling, actors, especially women actors. Not sure if there were any other accusations or anything that could be considered physically abusive or criminal, but when you look at his work, and there was something disturbing about everything he's done. And again, my God, there were so many, at least 3 or 4 of his movies I absolutely loved. I don't think I would dismiss his body of work, but I do think that it's worth it to hear from more people who worked with him about any behavior that he perpetrated. Such as, again, you have people in history, again, dead people like Ike Turner, OJ, a long list of men in and out of music, Picasso, etc., who were known misogynists in one way or another, men who, through eons, used their power or assumed power to abuse anyone and everyone, but especially women. And yet so many of them made work that so many of us loved and have benefited from and consumed and likely still do. This list would be thousands and tens of thousands long. And yes, some women have fallen prey to the power monster too, but again, it's been in the large part men. And yet, who is going to say, I mean, OJ, take or leave, great athlete. I enjoyed some of the fun and funny stuff he did as an actor, but it's disturbing that anybody would still respect him. Ike Turner, a little more complicated, what he did with Tina and with rock and roll in general, Rocket 88 and all that stuff. You cannot dismiss his influence and his genius at music, but you cannot dismiss the behavior either. Which is going to bring me eventually to some non-artist people. But yet, Lizzo and Ellen, so again, some women, both accused of basically being horribly abusive bosses for different reasons. These are people who are seen as progressive in every other way, but apparently they're personally reprehensible. There's a power thing there. I do believe there is maybe a perfectionism. There is maybe I get whatever I want when I want it kind of thing. Their works have brought lots of joy to the world. There are still Lizzo songs that I enjoy. My youngest still loves Lizzo, and my youngest is certainly progressive. My youngest child, I'm saying. Ellen, I remember enjoying some of her stand-up, never watched any of her shows. She's certainly pioneering in terms of being a lesbian, and you can't dismiss her as a person entirely, but no one should treat employees that way. The same with the things Lizzo said. But again, I don't think their work should be shunned. Brings me to something similar. Ted Nugent and Kid Rock, never accused, as far as I know, of being abusive in any way. So it's not much a matter of them being bad people or doing bad things, but that they have clearly racist views and political views that are very damaging to a lot of people in the world. And I think that those views have actually had way more of an impact on the world than any of the music that they've done, partly because they're so vocal. And listen, I applaud them for being vocal. I wish there were more highly successful artists out there who were willing to be more vocal about their beliefs on both sides of the aisle, but especially progressives, of course. And so that's not it. They can talk about it all they want, but I feel like it's overshadowed their work. Yet, no reason not to listen to them if you like the work they've done. I'm not a fan of either. Eric Clapton and Morrissey is sort of, now you're talking shades, because I have major issues with some of each of their politics. I'm unaware that they've done anything criminal or abusive. I've enjoyed some of Clapton's work over the decades. I've never been a huge fan, but I have enjoyed some of those songs. He's also more complex in that some of his views are quite liberal, but then he has these shitty views about, immigration and all of that stuff. I wouldn't miss him either way because I'm not a huge fan. Whereas with Morrissey, far more liberal on almost every level than any of these people, with maybe the exception of Ellen, let's say, and Lizzo. But again, has some protectionism strain and things about immigration, whatever you might want to say. He has still proven to be largely progressive. So I think this is a case of, can you disagree with some of the points he's made, which I do, but still respect his work and other points and other beliefs he has. And I am biased because his work and the Smiths' work have been a huge influence on me. But I also think that grade-wise, nuance-wise, this is pretty low on the spectrum, right? Whereas with Kanye, maybe similar. He is an absolute musical genius who to this day can still make music that is captivating. And even though I stopped listening years ago, there are things I would love to go back and listen to if I felt better about it, because I was amazed by his work, by his production. But he has major mental health issues. He's got a little megalomania and all of that stuff. The fact that he was a Trump supporter may turn some people on, may turn some people off. It turns me off, but it's something you should be able to overlook if there were other things. But then again, he is divisive, and that's where it gets me. The way Dave Chappelle was divisive about trans people, the way Kanye's been divisive about Jewish people, and even Chappelle to some degree, the same thing. It is disturbing. It is frustrating. It is the wrong direction to go. Geniuses, they're both geniuses. They're so misguided and defensive and divisive and honestly dumb, because if they thought through it more, they'd realize how wrong they are about these things. And I would still watch a Chappelle stand up, and I would still listen to the best of Kanye's work, And I think the way I've structured this is that I started with the people, at least in general, who were clearly the most offensive in terms of their crimes and all of that, and have kind of gone down the list of people who haven't really committed any crimes, but whose views have been called into question, which I think is actually a different discussion. Right. But it's also part of the same world of discussing that we're doing here, which has to do with how do you judge others, and how does that affect how you judge what they've done in terms of work, not in terms of their personal life, which brings me to a couple more examples. Really, one last big one, which is J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter. Yeah, I will say, no doubt, she has done way more good than harm. Way more good than harm. And although one of my 3 kids cannot stomach her, and I respect why they can't stomach her, there are tons of kids and adults, many of whom consider themselves left of center and farther. And honestly, the great thing about Harry Potter is it appeals to people of all stripes. But a lot of people who love Harry Potter are, progressive in terms of politics, social issues, and in particular sex and gender, who find comfort and joy and inspiration in her work. Now, I cannot agree with her, what do they call it, TERF, trans-exclusionary radical feminist beliefs. Like Macy Gray, I find it annoying that these people are using this as a way to divide, as if saying, oh, it's not fair that trans people are getting all of this attention when women have been struggling for We know women have been struggling for decades. There are a lot of people who have been struggling for a long amount of time, and just because another group is finally getting some attention about that doesn't mean that that attention is going to be taken away from you. I mean, media-wise, but who cares about the media? The media is going to do whatever it wants. There are things behind the scenes that will still continue to promote feminism and all of that stuff, but don't be inclusive. Be inclusive. That's what I'm saying. So I don't think I could hang with her. Maybe I could and just not talk about that topic. But either way, I loved Harry Potter. I loved the movies as well. I love the spin-offs, and I always will. And will also disagree with that particular view of hers. Although I don't know her or the rest of her views. Although I'm sure that she said some of them and I just haven't read them. Final of this section here. I'm going to talk about people like Margaret Sanger, Martin Luther King Jr., and others who are, again, nothing to do with art. Their work was world-changing and extremely positive, extremely supportive, even though they were flawed people. Sanger had views that were aligned with the eugenics movement. She was borderline racist on many things. Some would say more than borderline racist. Yet Planned Parenthood has done far more good than harm, has been far more supportive than anything else. So you can't dismiss, you can if you want, I'm saying, but I don't think you should dismiss the amazing work that she put out into the world because of some misguided views. Martin Luther King was supposedly sexually abusive or, a cheater and all of this stuff. Whether or not that's true, how in the world could you ever dismiss the peace and love that he put into the world? I mean, you kind of say the same thing on a very smaller scale about John Lennon, who was not necessarily the greatest person personally, especially towards women, but he put out far more love and peace and joy and world-changing things, like Martin Luther King, on a different level than not. Can't excuse their beliefs, can't excuse their behavior, depending on who I'm talking to here. But who of a more liberal mindset can dispute that they did far more good than harm? It bears repeating. I mean, it gets more complicated when you think of the robber barons of the early 20th century who were, back when income inequality was also a thing, although not as bad as now, believe it or not. There are certain things that are better now. That I don't think so. But a lot of mega rich who treated their employees like shit or were discriminatory in other ways, who held racist views, whatever you want to say, misogynist views. But then at the end of their lives, they leave money to charities. They leave money to foundations. They found libraries and museums and things like that. It's like they were trying to carbon offset their shitty behavior. And that's a tough one, because there's no doubt that a lot of their money did a hell of a lot of good. But in many ways, it was born in blood. So how do you reconcile that? I don't know. Does that have to do with forgiveness? Did they even care about forgiveness or seek it? These are tough questions to answer, which brings me to some conclusions. And that is this. We can't answer those questions because we rarely, if ever, know the whole story about anybody, no matter how much it's talked about. If you're not someone who knows that person for real and or has witnessed their behavior or their rejection of that behavior or acceptance or admission or whatever it is, then you don't know the whole story. Again, not excusing the behavior, but it's hard to say this person's out, this person's in, because somebody else might have a different opinion about that, depending on how much they know. We have all consumed and benefited from art and business made by assholes. That is just the truth. We do it every single day. God, I can't remember the name of that TV show with Kristen Bell where they were all dead. I know, I don't know, it's not coming to me right now. But the whole point being there was not a way at that point to get into heaven because nobody was good enough to get there. We're all compromised. It's just a fact. If you go to a store and buy something, you've probably bought it from a company that is compromised. That is just the case I think it's been the case for all of the world, but especially in the modern era. And yet, so much of the things that we have consumed, art or non-art, have done, again, far more good than the harm that person or entity has perpetrated. And that's very hard to reconcile. Time does not heal or excuse everything, but it does put things into context. It does allow the good works to shine over the bad, which is the takeaway I think we should all get about all this, is to find a way to continue to correct the bad and to call out the bad and to show and talk about how it is unacceptable and inexcusable, but to still allow the good to shine. And this is it. It's rarely the case that a person can be classified as out and out good or out and out bad. It is the exception, in fact, that people are generally seen as bad. I believe most people are mostly good most of the time. And I think that might be a quote from somebody else. I don't know. We don't need to turn a blind eye to the badness to justify our appreciation of the good works. That's the real conclusion here, which is, can you have two opposing thoughts in your head? Are you a complex human? Can you say, this person sucked at what they did here, but this thing they did is absolutely amazing, and not have to justify it? We're complex enough creatures to hold conflicting opinions. It may be easier to appreciate the work if it doesn't somehow feel related to the crimes. Again, that kind of sliminess of some of R. Kelly's work or whatever, or Marilyn Manson. I Believe I Can Fly is a lot easier to take than some of his more disturbing narratives, because there's nothing in there that alludes to his behavior, which is an interesting point. We have a right as individuals to enjoy whatever artwork we want. I don't believe in banning or burning anything, but it would be nice to give at least some consideration to other things the person might have done, again, without necessarily shunning the work if that's work that you enjoy, which means the final answer is it's your call. And as long as you're not promoting the bad behavior or agreeing with it, then that's fine. I think it's fine. I think there are times where it is okay to consume the work of somebody who's done something bad because you enjoy the work as a separate thing. People often say that art comes from somewhere unknown, that it is an inspiration. It's, I don't know, spiritual or psychological, or, comes from the heavens, muses, whatever you want to say. And that said, we all share in that on a level that connects us. And it would be better to focus on the thing that connects us and not exclude those things that connects us, while still acknowledging that there were things that were unacceptable. The bonus, again, MXtra video, it's going to be you. It's going to be you responding to everything I've said here. I'm delaying it, and we'll put it out when I've gotten enough comments from all of you to make a video about it and to respond in kind. I think this would almost be an easier topic to discuss if there was more back and forth, if there was more feedback. So please do comment. I will put it in that video, no matter who you are or what you say. No matter whether you disagree with me or not, I'll put it in the video. That is my promise. The featured song for this weird episode and slightly longer episode is a cover I did of Voltio's Ponmela. Under my production name, The Drop. I did it for a film soundtrack by request of the director. And my production partner and I took the reggaeton and hip hop and added kind of an alt rock to it. It's still very true to the original, and I loved being able to spit those lyrics in Spanish, but it does have a difference. I love taking on that challenge. I love taking on a different language, taking on a different style and all of that. And I feel like it's a pretty dynamic song. You'll get to hear it in a minute or two. I chose it for this episode because, well, is it controversial that I did a song like this? I don't think so, but you tell me. Also, interesting point, Voltio, the guy known as Voltio, it's a nickname, ended up retiring from music in 2014 and became born again, and has kind of renounced the things that he I guess, rapped about or talked about in his music and did. And that brings up the idea of redemption, especially in light of such a racy, objectifying song, which, Ponmela is. Does any of it matter? Songs like this can exist. Other than to the person themselves who feel like the way Little Richard at one point accepted Christianity and then finally accepted that he was gay and reconciled all of it before he died, long before he died. I think it matters more to the person, but it also matters to other people going through that journey. I've never been a fan of people like Voltio or Little Richard or Al Green saying, I reject the sexuality in favor of the religion, because I think those things can coexist, but it's a personal journey that has in some way a relation to this topic of this. Questions, what's your take on all this? We've all consumed work by heinous people or people who have done heinous things. Which of those people's work do you still appreciate? Which, if any, have you shunned and will never go back to again? I got rid of some of my Kanye CDs, all of them, when I was moving, and I slightly regret that because I think it was a reactionary move, and at the same time, I understand why I did it. Do you think it's possible to respect a person's work without respecting them? I want to know the answers to all of these because, as always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you for hanging with me for this slightly longer episode, and I will see you next week for the final episode of Season 6.
Dale más, voy a hacer que dale te prenda. Chiquitita quiere ser una sex. Se le saca un bebé. Chiquitita quiere ser una sex. Él quiere que le dé, que le suba la baja, la toca, la roce, la pone, la cosa, la gente, la viene, la pesa, la mete, la grinde, la lleva, la cama, la coja, la metro, onge, óptica y erótica, como bailarina exótica, me modela, se entruja, la tela, me embruja, me pela, me cela, me pone mal, no marra, ahora y bailar, se me pega y me quiere matar, masacra especial, instinto animal, mami, si te cojo te va a devorar, chiquitita quiere ser una sex, se le saca cuando bebé, hey, chiquitita quiere ser una sex, demonio vestido de mujer, ¿qué va haciendo eso así? No me ves, el hecho de mujer de la mini falda, lo pongo en Ponmela. ¿Qué va haciendo eso así? No me ves, el hecho de mujer de la mini falda, lo pongo en Ponmela. Ponmela, tiembla, Ponmela en la 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 Ponmela. Que te quiera mamá, que te quiera mamá, que tú quieres de mamá, que te prenda, que te quienda, a ti que bailando tu erotín, como acierta. Dime si no es así, cuando me besa te sube la mini, moda ese bikini,